there's a line, invisible but absolute, that separates those who build wealth from those who merely earn money. It's not drawn by education, by opportunity, by circumstances of birth. It's drawn by a single shift in perspective, a shift so profound that once you see it, you can never unsee it. And on one side of that line, people work their entire lives. On the other side, their lives work for them. Let me tell you something that's going to challenge everything you've been taught about success. Most millionaires in the United States build their wealth through businesses, not salaries. On average, self-employed people are 4 times wealthier than workers. 4 times, not 10% more, not twice as much, 4 times wealthier. And before you think this is about starting a business or quitting your job tomorrow, it's not. This is about something far more fundamental. This is about the lens through which you see the world, the questions you ask, the way you value your time, the relationship you have with money itself. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you. As an employee, you're renting your time and skills to the owner, who then uses your work to build something valuable. You're not building an asset. You're being the asset. You're the tool that someone else is using to create wealth. And the moment you stop, the moment you can't work, your value to that system drops to 0. Now, I'm not saying employment is wrong. I'm not saying everyone should quit their jobs and become entrepreneurs. What I'm saying is that if you only think like an employee, if that's the only framework you have for understanding value and wealth creation, you're going to spend your entire life building someone else's dreams while your own remain just that, dreams. Let me take you back to a moment that changed how I saw everything. I was young, working hard, doing well by conventional standards, good job, regular paycheck, moving up. And I met a man, older, successful, clearly wealthy, though he didn't flaunt it. And I asked him the question everyone asks, "What do you do?" And he smiled, not condescending, just knowing. And he said, "I don't do, I own." I didn't understand at first. I thought he was being cryptic, playing games. But he explained. "You," he said, pointing at me, "you trade hours for dollars. You go to work. You produce value. Someone pays you for that value. And when you stop working, the money stops, right?" I nodded. That was obvious. That's how the world worked. He continued, "I own things that produce value whether I'm working or not. Businesses, real estate, investments. I get paid because I own the mechanism that creates value, not because I personally create it." And that conversation, that single conversation, it planted a seed that would grow into a completely different understanding of wealth, because he was right. As an employee, you only need to focus on your part of the overall business. But as a business owner, your focus expands so that you consider all the costs of running your business as well as all the benefits and returns. The employee sees a paycheck. The owner sees a system. The employee thinks about their role. The owner thinks about how all the roles fit together to create something greater than any individual contribution. The employee worries about job security. The owner thinks about asset security. It's a completely different paradigm. And here's what's both beautiful and terrifying about it. You can shift your thinking without changing your circumstances. You can start thinking like an owner, even while you're working as an employee. And when you make that shift, everything changes. Let me give you a practical example. An employee looks at their salary and thinks, "I need to earn more." An owner looks at their time and thinks, "How can I create value that scales beyond my personal hours?" Same person, same situation, completely different questions. And those different questions lead to completely different actions, which lead to completely different results. I knew a woman, brilliant, hardworking, stuck. She was earning $60,000 a year working for a marketing agency. Good at her job, clients loved her. But she was maxed out, working 50, 60 hours a week, no time for anything else. And her salary had plateaued because there were only so many hours she could work and only so much the agency would pay her. She came to me frustrated. "I'm doing everything right," she said. "Why am I not getting ahead?" And I asked her one question. "What do you own?" She looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You have skills," I said. "You have knowledge. You have relationships with clients who love your work. But what do you own? What asset do you possess that creates value even when you're not personally working?" Long pause. And then, quietly, nothing. "I own nothing." That was her awakening moment. Not that she needed to quit her job, but that she needed to shift how she thought about her work. The employee mindset teaches you to expect immediate gratification for your efforts. For example, a paycheck. People who build a wealth mindset understand that skills come first and work toward building expertise that can scale. So she started small. On weekends, she began creating marketing templates and guides, not custom work for clients, standardized products that could be sold over and over, digital products. One creation, infinite sales. It took her 6 months to build a library of products while still working her full-time job. The first month she launched, she made $300, barely worth mentioning. But the second month she made $800, the third month $2,000, and she hadn't worked any extra hours that month. The products just existed, working for her while she slept, while she was at her day job, while she was living her life. Within 2 years, her product income exceeded her salary. And here's the crucial part. She didn't work harder. She didn't have special advantages. She didn't get lucky. She just shifted from thinking, how do I earn more, to what can I own that creates value? That's the owner mindset. And it doesn't require you to own a business. It requires you to own assets. Ownership offers unlimited income potential. When you own a piece of a company or an investment property, your earnings are directly tied to the success of that asset. Now let me talk about something that makes people uncomfortable: risk. Because when I talk about thinking like an owner, people immediately say, but that's risky. Employment is safe. I need the security. And I understand that. I truly do. But let me ask you something. Is employment really safe? When working for an employer, you are on their balance sheet, making mistakes on their money and budget. However, when you take a calculated risk on your money, you've assessed the return you might get from it and the potential for failure. Let me tell you about risk from a different angle. When you're an employee, you have one source of income, one. And if that source disappears, layoff, company closes, you get fired, you become unable to work. Your income drops to zero. Is that really less risky than having multiple small income streams from things you own? The perception of safety is often an illusion. Employment feels safe because it's familiar, because it's what everyone does, because it's socially acceptable. But feeling safe and being safe are not the same thing. I watched this play out during the pandemic. Millions of people who thought they had job security discovered they didn't. They're safe. Employment evaporated overnight. And the people who had been building ownership, who had been creating assets, building businesses, developing multiple income streams, they were better positioned to weather the storm. Not because they were smarter or more talented, but because they'd been thinking differently. Ownership also comes with risks, but successful people learn to manage those risks strategically. Here's what I want you to understand about risk. There's no such thing as no risk. The question isn't whether you'll face risk. The question is what kind of risk you'll face. The risk of depending entirely on one employer, or the risk of building something of your own. And here's the paradox. The more you try to avoid risk through employment security, the more risk you actually take on, because you're putting all your eggs in one basket. You're betting your entire financial future on someone else's business decisions, on someone else's ethics, on someone else's competence, on economic forces completely outside your control. When you think like an owner, you don't avoid risk. You manage it. You diversify it. You take smaller, calculated risks across multiple assets rather than one massive, unrecognized risk on a single source of income. Let me give you another angle on this. While most people see money as something to spend, wealth builders see it as something to grow. They think like owners, not just employees or consumers. They focus on long-term value, not short-term gratification. Think about how an employee views a paycheck versus how an owner views capital. An employee gets paid on Friday and thinks, what bills can I pay? What can I buy? An owner receives income and thinks, what can I acquire with this that will generate more income? Same money, completely different relationship with it. The employee sees money as something to use. The owner sees money as a tool to acquire assets. The owner sees money as a tool to acquire assets that generate more money. It's not about being cheap. It's not about deprivation. It's about understanding what money actually is. Money isn't wealth. Money is the means to acquire wealth, and wealth, real wealth, is assets that produce income. Now let me tell you about something that trips up almost everyone who tries to make this shift. The time horizon. The employee mindset teaches you to expect immediate gratification for your efforts. People who build a wealth mindset understand that skills come first and work toward building expertise that can scale. When you work a job, you get paid every 2 weeks. Every week, maybe monthly, but regularly, predictably. Your brain gets conditioned to this rhythm. Work, get paid. Work, get paid. Immediate connection between effort and reward. But ownership doesn't work like that. When you build assets, when you think like an owner, there's often a long gap between effort and reward. You might work for months, even years, before an asset starts generating meaningful income. And most people can't handle that gap. They start building something, don't see immediate results, and quit. Go back to the comfort of a regular paycheck. I knew a man who understood this better than anyone I've met. He worked a regular job. Nothing special. Middle management. But every spare dollar, every spared hour he was building. Real estate first, small properties, then a side business, then investments. And for the first 5 years, he was working harder than he'd ever worked in his life, with almost nothing to show for it financially. His friends mocked him. Why are you killing yourself? You're making the same money you'd make just focusing on your career. Actually, less, because you're not getting promoted, because you're distracted. But he understood something they didn't. He was planting seeds, and seeds don't produce fruit immediately. They require time, patience, consistent tending, and faith that the harvest will come. Year 6, things started clicking. His rental properties were cash flowing nicely. His business was gaining traction. His investments were compounding. By year 10, his asset income exceeded his salary. By year 15, he was financially independent. Could have stopped working entirely if he wanted to. His friends, still working, still waiting for the next raise, still dependent on their employers, still trading hours for dollars. They'd taken the path that felt safer, that provided immediate gratification. And they were still exactly where they'd started, just older and more tired. That's the owner mindset. Ownership comes with inherent responsibility and accountability that shapes how people think and act. When you own something, you bear the consequences of your decisions directly. You're willing to delay gratification because you understand that real wealth isn't built in weeks or months. It's built over years and decades. Now let me talk about something else that's crucial: leverage. Because this is where thinking like an owner becomes exponentially more powerful than thinking like an employee. As an employee, your income is directly tied to your hours. You work 40 hours, you get paid for 40 hours. You want to earn more, you work more hours. Or you develop skills that command higher hourly rates. But there's a ceiling, a hard ceiling. There are only 24 hours in a day, and you can only charge so much per hour before you price yourself out of the market. Owners think about leverage. How can I multiply my effort? How can I create value that scales beyond my personal time? As a business owner, you can employ other people to work in your business, expanding the capacity and capabilities of your organization. Let me give you a concrete example. A consultant who thinks like an employee trades their time for money. They might charge $200 an hour. Work 40 billable hours a week, they make $8,000. Great income. But what happens when they're sick, on vacation, want to retire? The income stops. A consultant who thinks like an owner creates a different model. They document their process. They train other consultants. They build a firm. Now they're not selling their hours. They're selling the firm's capacity. 10 consultants working at $100 an hour. The firm generates $40,000 a week. The owner might personally work fewer hours, but earns more because they own the system that creates value, not just their personal contribution to it. Or consider real estate. An employee mindset says, I need to save up enough money to buy a rental property. Might take years, might never happen. An owner mindset says, how can I control real estate without necessarily owning it outright? Can I partner with investors? Can I use financing? Can I create real estate funds? Can I wholesale properties? Same goal, completely different thinking. One is limited by personal resources. The other is limited only by creativity and understanding of how value and ownership actually work. I watched a young woman demonstrate this principle beautifully. She was working as a graphic designer, talented, but trading hours for dollars. She was making maybe $50 an hour, which sounds good until you realize that's $100,000 a year at full capacity, and that's her ceiling unless she raises her rates so high that she loses clients. So she shifted her thinking. Instead of selling design services by the hour, she created a membership. Companies paid a monthly fee for unlimited graphic design requests. She hired other designers to fulfill the work. She managed the client relationships and quality control, but she wasn't doing all the design work herself. Within 2 years, she had 50 clients paying $500 a month. That's $25,000 a month, $300,000 a year. And she was personally working less than she had when she was freelancing, because she'd created a system, an asset. She was thinking like an owner, not a worker. That's leverage, and it's available in every industry, every field, every type of work. You just have to shift your thinking from, what can I do, to, what can I own that creates value? Now let me address something that I know is running through your mind. This sounds great in theory, but I don't have capital. I don't have resources. I can't just buy businesses or real estate or build systems. I'm barely making ends meet. And I hear that. I understand that. But here's what you need to understand. People who build a wealth mindset understand that skills come first and work toward building expertise that can scale. Thinking like an owner doesn't start with money. It starts with seeing opportunities that other people miss. Let me tell you about a kid I knew. 22 years old, working at a restaurant, barely making minimum wage, no saving, no advantages. But he noticed something. The restaurant had a problem with online reviews. Negative reviews would sit there for months, hurting business, and nobody was managing the restaurant's online reputation. So he approached the owner, said, I can manage your online presence, respond to reviews, encourage happy customers to leave feedback, monitor your reputation. I'll do it for 3 months free. If you see improvement, pay me a percentage of any revenue increase. The owner agreed. Nothing to lose. The kid worked his tail off, responding to every review, creating systems to generate positive feedback, monitoring competitor reviews to learn what customers valued. 3 months later, the restaurant's rating had gone from 2 stars to 6 stars, and revenue was up 30%. The owner paid him, gladly, and then the kid approached other restaurants in the area. I can do the same for you. No upfront cost, just a percentage of proven revenue increase. Within a year, he had 15 clients. Within 2 years, he'd hired others to do the actual work, and he was managing the business. He'd gone from barely surviving on minimum wage to running a 6-figure business. Not because he had capital, not because he had connections, but because he saw a problem he could solve, structured a deal that removed risk for the client, and thought like an owner instead of an employee. That's available to anyone, in any situation. The question isn't whether you have resources. The question is whether you're looking for opportunities to create value that scales beyond your personal hours. Now, let me talk about something that's absolutely crucial, but that most people never consider: equity. Ownership offers unlimited income potential because your earnings are directly tied to the success of that asset. When you work for someone else, you might get a salary, maybe bonuses if you're lucky, but the real wealth, the real value being created, that goes to the owners in the form of equity. The company becomes more valuable, and they own that value. Most employees never think about this. They're so focused on their paycheck that they don't see the wealth being built around them, that they're contributing to but not capturing. I'll give you a stark example. 2 people start at a tech company on the same day, same role, same salary, $60,000 a year. Person A thinks like an employee, works hard, gets raises. After 10 years, they're making $90,000. They've earned about $750,000 over that decade. Good money. Person B thinks like an owner. They negotiate to take a slightly lower salary, $55,000, in exchange for equity in the company, 0.2%, tiny amount. But it's ownership. Over 10 years, they earn about $680,000 in salary, less than person A, but the company grows. And after 10 years, the company is acquired for $200 million. Person B's 0.2%, $400,000, plus the $680,000 they earned. Over $1 million total. Person A got their $750,000, and that's it. Same work. Same contribution, different thinking. One saw themselves as a worker entitled to fair payment for hours worked. The other saw themselves as an owner entitled to a share of the value being created. Now, not every company offers equity. Not every situation allows for that, but the principle applies everywhere. Are you thinking about how to capture a share of the value you're creating, or just how to get paid for your time? I mentored a software developer who understood this. He could have taken a job at a big corporation for $120,000 a year. Secure, prestigious. But he took a job at a startup for $80,000 plus 3% equity. His friends thought he was crazy. You're leaving $40,000 a year on the table. But he was thinking differently. He saw the potential. He saw what that company could become, and he wanted to own a piece of it. 4 years later, the company sold. His 3% was worth $4.2 million. His friends who took the safe corporate jobs, still earning their salaries, still dependent on their next paycheck. Risk, sure. It could have failed, but he'd assessed that risk. He believed in the team, the product, the market opportunity, and he made a calculated bet that his ownership stake would ultimately be worth more than a higher salary. He was right. That's thinking like an owner. And it's available in more situations than you think. You can negotiate equity in startups. You can negotiate profit-sharing arrangements. You can start side businesses where you own 100%. You can invest in businesses' real estate stocks. Become an owner of assets rather than just an employee of enterprises. The key is shifting your default question from, "What will they pay me?" to, "How can I own a piece of what's being built?" Let me tell you about another critical difference between worker thinking and owner thinking. Problem-solving orientation. As a business owner, your focus expands so that you consider all the costs of running your business as well as all the benefits and returns. Workers are taught to stay in their lane. Do your job. Don't worry about things outside your responsibility. Clock in, complete your tasks, clock out. That's not criticism. That's how employment is structured. But owners can't think that way. Owners have to see the whole picture. They have to understand how all the pieces fit together. They have to anticipate problems before they become crises. They have to optimize systems, not just execute tasks. And here's what's powerful. You can develop owner-level thinking even while you're an employee. And when you do, you become exponentially more valuable. I knew a woman working in operations for a mid-sized company. Entry-level position. She could have just done her job, collected her paycheck, gone home. But she started thinking like an owner. She noticed inefficiencies, redundant processes, waste. And instead of just noting them, she documented them, analyzed them, came up with solutions. She brought a proposal to management. "I've identified ways we could save $40,000 a year in operational costs and reduce turnaround time by 30%. Can I implement these changes?" Management was skeptical but agreed. She implemented her systems. Everything worked exactly as she'd predicted. Within 6 months, she was promoted. Within 2 years, she was running the entire department. Within 5 years, she was a partner in the company. She was a partner in the company with actual equity ownership. From entry-level employee to owner. Not because she worked harder than everyone else, but because she thought differently. She saw problems that needed solving and opportunities that others missed. She thought like an owner before she became one. Now let me go even deeper into something that separates owners from workers at a fundamental level. The concept of systems thinking. Ownership comes with inherent responsibility and accountability that shapes how people think and act. When you own something, you bear the consequences of your decisions directly. Workers think in terms of tasks. I need to complete this project. I need to attend this meeting. I need to respond to these emails. Linear thinking. One thing after another. Check boxes. Complete assignments. Owners think in terms of systems. How can I create a process that produces consistent results without my constant involvement? How can I build something that works whether I'm there or not? How can I turn my knowledge into a system that others can execute? This is perhaps the most profound shift in thinking you can make. Because when you start thinking in systems, you stop trading time for money. You start building assets that compound. Let me give you an example from my own life. Early in my career, I realized I was solving the same problems over and over for different clients, answering the same questions, giving the same advice, and I was charging by the hour for these consultations, which felt good at the time. But I was on a treadmill, always needing the next client, always needing the next billable hour. Then I had a realization. What if I turned this repeated knowledge into a system? What if I documented everything I was teaching people and created a framework they could follow on their own? I spent 6 months creating a comprehensive program, templates, worksheets, video lessons, everything someone would need to solve these problems without needing to hire me for expensive one-on-one consulting. My billable income dropped to zero during those 6 months. My accountant thought I'd lost my mind, but I was building something, a system, an asset. And when I launched it, something remarkable happened. I made more in the first month selling this program than I typically made in 3 months of consulting. And I hadn't worked a single billable hour. The second month was even better. The third month better still, because the system was working, the asset was producing, and I was learning something profound about wealth creation. When you own a business or assets, you have something that can generate income continuously, and in many cases, with less direct involvement over time. That's systems thinking. That's owner mentality. You're not asking, how do I earn more this week? You're asking, what can I build once that produces value indefinitely? And this applies to everything. If you're a teacher, you can think like a worker and teach classes for hourly pay. Or you can think like an owner and create courses that teach thousands simultaneously. If you're a craftsperson, you can think like a worker and take custom orders one at a time. Or you can think like an owner and create product lines that sell while you sleep. Same skills, same knowledge, completely different economic outcomes. The difference is thinking in systems rather than tasks. Now let me address something that stops most people from making this transition. Fear of failure. Because here's the truth. When you take a calculated risk on your money, you've assessed the return you might get from it and the potential for failure. This is fundamentally different from working within the safety of employment, where mistakes are made on someone else's budget. As an employee, failure is somewhat cushioned. You make a mistake, you might get reprimanded, but you still get paid. The company absorbs the cost of your learning curve. As an owner, your mistakes cost you directly. Your failures are your own, and that's terrifying to most people. I watched this fear paralyze a brilliant man for years. He had ideas, good ideas. He knew how to execute them, but he couldn't pull the trigger. What if it fails? What if I lose money? What if people think I'm foolish? And here's what I told him that finally broke through. You're already failing. You're failing slowly, safely, comfortably. You're failing by not trying. You're failing by letting your ideas die inside you. You're failing by trading the best hours of your life for a paycheck that will never make you wealthy. That's failure. It's just socially acceptable failure. That hit him hard, because it was true. He wasn't avoiding failure by staying employed. He was just choosing a different kind of failure. The failure of never knowing what he was capable of. The failure of never building anything that was truly his. So he started. Small at first, side project while keeping his job. And yes, he failed. His first attempt didn't work, lost some money, felt embarrassed. But he learned, adjusted, tried again. Second attempt did better. Third attempt actually worked. Within 3 years, he'd built something substantial enough that he could leave his job. Within 7 years, he'd built something that made his former salary look like pocket change. The fear of failure never went away, but he learned to work with it, to see it as information rather than as a stop sign. Successful people learn to manage risk strategically. They build skills, test ideas in small ways, and expand gradually as they learn what works. That's owner thinking. You don't avoid risk. You don't avoid failure. You get comfortable with discomfort. You learn to see failure as education rather than as defeat. Because every successful owner you've ever heard of, they've failed. Multiple times. Often spectacularly. The difference is they kept going. They learned. They adapted. They tried again. Workers are taught to avoid mistakes. Get it right the first time. Follow procedures. Stay safe. Owners embrace experimentation. They know that failure is the cost of innovation. That mistakes are the tuition for education. That every setback is information that brings them closer to success. Let me tell you about another critical aspect of owner thinking. Abundance versus scarcity mentality. While most people see money as something to spend, wealth builders see it as something to grow. They focus on long-term value, not short-term gratification. Workers often operate from scarcity. There are only so many promotions, only so many opportunities, only so much money in the budget. So they compete with colleagues. They protect their territory. They see someone else's success as a threat to their own. Owners operate from abundance. They know that value creation is unlimited, that there's always room for more success, that collaboration often produces better results than competition. They're not trying to capture a bigger slice of a fixed pie. They're trying to create bigger pies. I've seen this play out in fascinating ways. I knew two people in similar situations, both working in sales, both talented. Persona saw every other salesperson as competition, guarded their leads, refused to share strategies, saw the success of others as evidence that there was less success available for them. Person B saw other salespeople as potential collaborators, shared what was working, asked for advice, celebrated others' wins, built relationships based on mutual support. And here's what happened. Persona stayed at roughly the same income level for years. They plateaued because they were operating in a closed system. Person B's income grew exponentially. Why? Because all those relationships they'd built, all that goodwill, all that knowledge sharing, it came back to them multiplied. People referred business, shared opportunities, collaborated on bigger deals than any of them could have done alone. Person B had accidentally created a network that functioned like a business asset, generating opportunities continuously. That's abundance thinking. That's owner mentality. Understanding that the more value you create for others, the more value flows back to you. Business owners tend to see opportunities where employees might see obstacles. This mindset shift can open doors to wealth creation that are invisible to those stuck in the employee paradigm. Now, let me talk about something that I think is the ultimate expression of owner thinking: legacy. Workers think about retirement. Owners think about legacy. Workers ask, will I have enough to stop working? Owners ask, what will outlast me? This isn't about ego, it's about time horizon. It's about seeing yourself as a steward of something larger than your own life. When you build assets, real assets, you're creating something that can benefit your children, your grandchildren, your community. You're creating wealth that compounds across generations. I knew a man who exemplified this. He started with nothing, built a small business, then used the cash flow from that business to buy real estate, then used the equity in the real estate to invest in other businesses. By the time he was in his 50s, he'd built a portfolio of assets that generated substantial income. But here's what was remarkable. He didn't increase his lifestyle proportionally. He lived well but modestly, and everything beyond what he needed he reinvested into more assets, into opportunities for young people starting businesses, into his community. He was thinking decades ahead, thinking about what would exist long after he was gone. When he passed away, his children inherited not just money, but education. They'd watched him think like an owner their entire lives. They'd learned to see opportunities, to build systems, to create value, to think in terms of assets rather than income. He'd passed on not just wealth, but the mindset that creates wealth. That's what's possible when you truly embrace owner thinking. You're not just building a comfortable life for yourself. You're creating a foundation that can lift everyone connected to you. You're thinking in terms of decades and generations rather than paychecks and years. And it starts with a simple decision. The decision to stop seeing yourself as a worker who earns money and start seeing yourself as an owner who builds assets. The decision to stop trading time for dollars and start creating systems that generate value. The decision to stop thinking about jobs and start thinking about ownership. This doesn't mean you quit your job tomorrow. It doesn't mean you take reckless risks. It doesn't mean you abandon security for wild speculation. It means you start thinking differently, today, right now, this moment. Start asking different questions. Not how can I earn more, but what can I own? Not what should I buy, but what should I build? Not how do I get promoted, but how do I create value that scales? Those different questions will lead you to different answers, different actions, different results. And over time, over years of thinking like an owner, even while you might still be employed, you'll build something real. Something that produces income whether you're working or not. Something that grows. Something that lasts. I've watched people make this transition. It's not easy. It requires patience. It requires learning. It requires tolerating uncertainty and discomfort. It requires you to delay gratification and play the long game. But the people who do it, the people who truly embrace owner thinking, They build wealth that workers can't even imagine, not because they're smarter, not because they're luckier, but because they see the world through a different lens. And that lens is available to you right now, today. You don't need permission. You don't need credentials. You don't need capital. You just need to make the decision to stop thinking like a worker and start thinking like an owner. To stop seeing yourself as someone who earns and start seeing yourself as someone who builds. To stop trading your life for a paycheck and start creating assets that give you your life back. That's the shift. That's the transformation. And it's waiting for you on the other side of a single decision. The decision to think differently, to see differently, to be different. Everything changes when you make that shift. Not overnight, not magically, but certainly, inevitably. Because you're no longer playing the same game everyone else is playing. You're playing a different game entirely. A game where time works for you instead of against you. Where money multiplies instead of just accumulating. Where your value compounds rather than staying fixed. That's what I want for you. Not just wealth, but the mindset that creates wealth. The perspective that sees opportunities. The thinking that builds assets. The understanding that transforms workers into owners. It's available. It's possible. It's waiting. All you have to do is start thinking differently.